we talked about the line, Georgia, Tennessee. He wasn't wearing a turtleneck yesterday, John, and you weren't wearing the Sedona shirt. What do you make of this line? 9.5. This tells me that Vegas thinks this is going to be fairly close. I wouldn't have been stunned if it was 17.5. If I'd have asked you, John, on Sunday morning after the Tennessee game, and you saw Georgia, Ole Miss, you saw Tennessee, you saw Tennessee, Missouri, what would you have thought the Tennessee, Georgia line would have been? If I would have just gone in there, blank slate, John Adams, what would you say?
I would have said around 13.
Okay.
So they factor out of the things into that. Tennessee's really good at home. It's won 14 in a row. I also think they look at Georgia's schedule and said, okay, it was sky high to beat Florida, big rival, big game against Missouri, SEC East on the line, win that game. Then they come back and playing 9th ranked Ole Miss and play pretty much a perfect game. And so you can't sustain that. And so it's about Georgia's due for an off game.
Okay.
That's what I think the odds makers are saying. I could just see, though, Georgia having an off game and still winning. I don't,
maybe more than 10.
Yeah, I mean, 10-point game's pretty close.
Caleb, your thoughts? You're a gambling guy. You like to throw your money away. So, what do you think of this 9.5-point spread?
Yeah, I lost some money on Sunday. I made a lot of money over the weekend, but then I put some money on DeAndre Hopkins going over 50 yards on Sunday. But Will Levis decided that, hey, if DeAndre Hopkins is open, I'm not smart enough to throw him the ball. Okay, sorry.
See, when gamblers lose, they always have an excuse ready.
Yes.
See, they blame it on somebody.
It's not my fault. Will Levis is stupid and puts mayonnaise in his coffee.
So do you. All right. So, what do you think of the line, Caleb? I wouldn't have been stunned if it was 16.5. John kind of lowballed me a little bit at 13.5. I wouldn't have been stunned if it was 2 touchdowns or more.
Here's why I think they set the line. I think Georgia's last 3 games on the road have all been within 1 score, haven't they? I believe their last 3 true road games. Missouri wasn't a road game. They played that one at home, and so they.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Yeah. Florida technically was a road game this year, but we know that's at a neutral site. They failed to cover in each of their last 3 home games, or excuse me, each of their last 3 road games. Tennessee hasn't lost at home in 2 years under Heupel. Their only 2 losses at home under Heupel are the Hendon Hooker game where he first came in against Pittsburgh, and they should have won that game when Hooker came in. That was Heupel's second game, Hendon Hooker's first action, and then the Ole Miss golf ball game where there was very, very, very questionable officiating in that game. And they haven't lost at home since that Ole Miss game. And so I think they're looking at Tennessee at home. They're looking at Georgia on the road. They're also looking at Georgia poured everything until last week in beating Ole Miss during the week of practice because they knew that if they beat Ole Miss, they got the East locked up. And they knew that Ole Miss would be and I think in Georgia's mind before last week's game, they considered Ole Miss at home a better chance to lock up the East than Tennessee on the road. So I think they kind of knew, okay, let's put everything into It's kind of like when you have a game 6 at home in the NBA playoffs and you're like, let me close this out at home because I don't want to go back on the road to have to win game 7. That's what Georgia was thinking with Ole Miss.
Daniel, the message board said I mortgage my house and put it on Georgia. That's not a knock on the team. They're just too depleted to compete. I thought they could earlier in the season. John, I give you 3 options. You could bet your mortgage on Tennessee, Georgia, 9.5 is the spread, or you could say, I'm keeping my money. There's no way I'm touching that.
I'll take option 3. I don't have a mortgage. I'll bet your mortgage.
Okay. How about your car payment? I've seen that snazzy little Kia you're driving. Nothing says John Adams like a good, affordable sedan.
You would be shocked at how much I had to pay for that. There were no new cars available. I'm ashamed to admit how much I paid, but that's another story. No, I would give the points. Here's one thing about, I don't think Georgia thinks about clinching the East. I think Georgia thinks about winning a 3rd consecutive national championship, and I think it thinks about trying to get better every week, and I think it's getting better. That's the other side of this. I think, yeah, it's had some problems on the road, but I think this team is getting better. It's healthier. Brock Bowers is not 100%, but Bowers at 80% is probably better than any other tight end in the country. So Ladd McConkey's pretty healthy. Their running game, their offensive line has really gotten better. A lot of teams' offensive lines get better late in the year, and theirs certainly has. They're protecting their quarterback. So I think Georgia's really in a good place. And another factor to me in this, Kirby Smart never beat Tennessee when he was a player. Coaches really, that leaves a lasting impression on the coach after if he were a player and things didn't go well. And I guarantee you he thinks about that every time his team gets ready to play Tennessee. I don't think Georgia will have a huge letdown in this game.
Here's why I would take Georgia with the points. Then I would not bet, and then Tennessee would be the third option. Is because, guys, this is tough for me to say. This is brutal because I don't like questioning effort. But Josh Heupel did a little bit after the game, the Missouri game, Caleb, and that's disturbing. I mean, and he came out of this press conference yesterday and said, no, it wasn't effort. It was not playing smart. Well, either's very troublesome, Caleb. But really the effort part of it with nothing left to play for as a gambler, I'm asking you, that would scare me to death because Tennessee, I mean, could go out there and really lay an egg if there's an effort issue. This could be bad.
Yeah, but I don't think there's going to be an effort issue, honestly. I think there's a lot of older people on this team that feel like they have a lot to play for with the year drawing to a close. I think that may have been concerning. I don't know if Josh Heupel's right about that. I think Josh Heupel has a problem diagnosing intangibles. If that's a phrase I could use, I think Josh Heupel evaluates pure talent and then says, if I coach that guy, he can do this. And doesn't take into account intangibles at all on how committed the guy is or what's upstairs or anything like that. I think Josh Heupel just believes that he can put the pieces to where they belong. I'm not saying that's a good trait at all. I think once you guys tell me, y'all have covered this longer than I have. I know the NFL when the NFL scouts quarterbacks and everything, they have to pay attention to intangibles. You kind of got to pay attention to that when you're recruiting too, don't you? When you're scouting talent recruiting, or is it more just look at the raw talent and call it a day?
I think you completely have to factor that in, John. I think it was the only smart thing that Derek Dooley said. You want the bell curve where most of your guys are in the middle that are talented and good character guys. But at one end, you probably got some guys that are uber talented that aren't very character guys. And the other end, you've got the character guys to pull them all up. No, I think there's a lot to be said for that.
Yeah, I think so too. But I think it's so hard to evaluate those intangibles. What round was Joe Montana drafted in? Was he like a third, fourth round guy?
I was fourth for some reason.
And of course, the classic case was Tom Brady. Could they see Tom Brady's intangibles, this uncanny knack to raise his game to almost superhuman proportions in the most crucial times, as he did so much in the Super Bowl? I think it's really hard to evaluate. And I think and you probably know, you've done more with recruiting, Dave, you probably know this. I think it's really hard to get to know somebody you're recruiting. There's not that much contact. And then you talk to people who know the recruit. Well, how many people, even if they think this guy's the scum of the earth, are they going to tell a college coach that? I don't think so. I think that they won't stress the negatives because they feel, well, maybe this kid will turn it around. He'll be better in college. He'll mature, that kind of thing. So I don't think you can get a really good profile of a high school recruit.
I think that has been a factor for every college football coach. And it's gotten worse and worse and worse as time has gone on. I felt like, I know of instances where Philip Fulmer went to a high school, now, albeit it was in Knoxville, and checked on the player's grades and checked on his whether or not he was showing up to class, and it probably was an illegal contact, but had the he cared about the player. I guess it doesn't matter now. It was Lee Smith at Powell. And he cared about the player because they had a family ties, and he goes in there and he checks his grades. He checks his attendance. That's not happening nowadays, John.
No, not at all. So it's really, again, I mean, the best thing, and when you're evaluating someone, if you're hiring somebody, the best thing you can get on someone is someone who has worked with him, have been around him, whom you respect, and he gives you a good recommendation. That's probably the best thing. I remember when I hired you, David, the News Sentinel, and I asked other people that had worked with you, and it was kind of, so-so. But I liked you, so I made the hire anyway. I didn't always go. With that approach, but I think by and large that's what you do, and I think you do that. But I don't think you can trust people now to give you an accurate portrayal of how a 17 or 18-year-old is.
Interesting. And who would have better ties into those schools that would probably get a better real answer, be like a Kirby Smart. Rick Terry Jewelry Design.
I'm sorry.
Oh, that's fine. Rick Terry Jewelry Design. They want to be your jeweler looking for affordable game day jewelry. How about the Fire Opals, a Tennessee tradition? Rick Terry Jewelry.com. They want to be your jeweler, and those Fire Opals are awesome. Go ahead, Caleb.
Well, that's where I was yes, there are intangible issues with Tennessee because I don't think Josh Heupel evaluates them well. I don't think Kirby Smart, I'm not sure he coaches them well. I think, I got to be honest, I don't see this Georgia dynasty run the same way I saw the Alabama dynasty runs of the early 2010s, because Georgia has consistently, for 2 years now, shown up in at least half their games and basically said, we really don't want to. It's been very clear they don't want to play that game that day. The problem is they're so insanely talented. I mean, these are two of the most loaded teams ever. I think these two Georgia teams, this Georgia run, the talent is more loaded than even Nick Saban's runs in the early 2010s, where they can afford to just take days off and say, oh, fourth quarter. Oh, shoot, we're down, guys. Let's go win this real quick so we can go home and party. I think I really think that's how Georgia's thinking. And I think they're able to get away with it the same way. I think their whole schedule has been what Tennessee was with Vanderbilt in the 90s, where Tennessee didn't really want to play Vanderbilt, but they knew when it got tight, when they needed to play in the end, they were going to win the game. And that's why they won, 14-7, 12-7, 17-10, where I think the scores when Peyton Manning was there. And I think Georgia does that weekly, guys. And they turn it on maybe 2 or 3 times a year when they feel like there's something significant to play for. I think last week was one of those games where they turned it on. I think Kirby Smart may want to turn it on this week, but you can't let that happen with your players consistently and it not come back to bite you. And I don't know if whether or not he turns it on. I don't know if his players are going to be willing to turn it on for a second straight week because they haven't done that all year.
Well, to John's point, I do want to throw this at you, John. I think that you bring up a really good point as far as the connection with the high school coaches, because when you're Alabama or Georgia and you're other than the most highly, highly rated prospect, what are you going to do when you show up on campus, John? You're probably going to sit for 2 years. So you need the kid with the right mindset that is willing to sit for 2 years. Whereas Tennessee has been selling over the past 15 plus years immediate playing time.
Yeah, to Kayla's point, I really couldn't disagree more about his assessment of what Georgia's done. It's won 27 straight games. Your goal is to win games. Your goal is to win championships. And Kirby's done that spectacularly well. He almost has 3 national championships. And if you compare the talent with Alabama, the run of quarterbacks, receivers, and running backs Alabama had, I think his talent has been better than what Georgia's had overall for a longer period of time, certainly. But I just think, I remember talking to an Alabama defensive lineman one year at Media Days about how much he got involved in recruiting new players to Alabama. And he said, well, I tell all the recruits that come here that are interested on their visit, I tell them, this place isn't for everybody. This is serious business. If you want to come to college and party, don't come here. This is serious business. And I think, Dave, what you're saying, I think that's very true. you get a different kind of player at those places. You get a player, you're not, because the other players let those recruits know, here's how it's going to be. Here's what will be expected of you. Here's how you'll be evaluated. And if you don't meet those standards, then you'll be on the bench.
Let me ask both of you this. And we're getting a little off topic, but I think we're on to something pretty interesting here. And that is Josh Heupel's kumbaya approach, which it has been, an intrinsic problem with the program. Reminding the Sports Treasures carries over 5 million Sports Treasures. Follow them on Facebook, Sports Treasures TN, to get daily updates. Sports Treasures, love it. 5 million Sports Treasures. Caleb, yay or nay? Is there something intrinsically wrong with the kumbaya, we're family, everything's good approach that Josh Heupel has?
It's hard for me to know the internal workings with Josh Heupel. That is the public appearance, but that's also the public appearance Dabo put on for Clemson for 10 years, and he won 2 national titles out of it. So it's hard for me to truly say that that's a failed approach when you and I mean, Philip Fulmer had that mentality for a while, and he won a national title. Now, I think Fulmer was, I think many of us agree, was too soft on players towards the end. We know what happened in the early 2000s, where just time after time there were mistakes. You know, there were players that there were issues that he let happen. But
yeah, John even at a press conference got called all kinds of names that I can't repeat even on YouTube.
But it's also, guys, we're forgetting that Kirby Smart is also doing a kumbaya approach. How many drivers is he going to? How many players is he going to like get arrested for driving for massive reckless driving issues? And say,
Caleb, that's not the players' problem. That's not their fault. I mean, the cars are too fast.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, they're just steering it. I mean, lower that, top out at 75 and the program will be fine.
Well, speaking of sports cars, John and I were talking last night, and Joe Milton's kind of like the best sports car in the world without a steering wheel. And part of the reason I think he's playing is the kumbaya approach. See, I tied that all in because you don't want to upset Tennessee's upperclassmen, which I think is bunk.
No, that's a good point. Remember when Nick Saban brought in Jalen Hurts and started him as a true freshman? Remember in the championship game when he pulled Jalen Hurts and put in Tua Tagovailoa? I mean,
great point.
When you make it, when you set up lay the foundation for your program, and the main thing is to communicate what you expect, so everybody understands. And the competitive nature of it is, you've got to do this and this and this. If you do that, you'll keep playing. But
okay,
go ahead.
No, you go.
Well, no, I'm just saying, yeah, everybody wants to have good team leaders and good team chemistry. But the thing is, players know who the best players are. And I think they want to win. And if you can't let sentimentality, or I just don't believe you can worry too much about chemistry. These are competitive athletes. They want to win games. If they're not winning games, they're not happy. If they are happy, then you don't want them in your program.
Okay, so let me ask you both this. Caleb, let me start with you and get a yay or nay out of you. Would Josh Heupel have benched Jalen Hurts / Joe Milton for Tua Tagovailoa / Nico if he had needed to at halftime? Was that the SEC championship game?
That was the national championship game.
Yeah, so, national championship game. Yeah. Would he have done that?
I think he actually could have done that. I think part of the, I told you guys this yesterday. I think part of the Joe Milton thing is it's easy to do this because Joe Milton's not going to be here next year. Whereas with Jalen Hurts, you got to make that decision because Jalen Hurts and Tua were both going to be on the roster the next year. So it's kind
I don't think there's any way in hell he would make that change.
He benched Milton for Hendon Hooker.
Yeah, but I mean, look how bad Milton was. I mean, Well, you're talking about two guys who are starting in the NFL now, both talented guys. Maybe Hurts wasn't perceived that time. I don't believe there's any way Josh Heupel would have made that move.
That's troubling to me.